Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Search for the Truth. And today I'm excited to have my guest again on the show, Dr. Bob.
Well, happy, beautiful day, Dr. Serge, and happy, beautiful day all. It's always fun to have a good conversation with you.
Awesome. Thank you for taking the time from your busy schedule to spend some time with us. And if you guys have any questions for Dr. Bob, let me know in the chat section so we can ask him. I know last time when you came on the show, we talked about coffee mostly, and we got so many more questions afterwards. So I may go through some of those questions with you today if you have time.
Let's make time.
Good. I'm excited. So first of all, tell us a bit about you, because you have a long list of qualifications of what you've done in your life, in your practice. So a little bit about you.
Well, I like to tell people that I'm always a student and sometimes a teacher, and a teacher to the tune of over 10,000 hours of license renewal seminars to doctors on 6 continents. But, 4 different degrees, 3 different postgraduate degrees. I'm the clinic director of the Natural Medicine Center in Houston, Texas. And much like you, we look at people and we try to figure out every natural strategy that they can do to get better fast. And the great news is we have good success with a huge variety of patients.
And what is really remarkable about you is you work with professional athletes. That's impressive to me.
It's fun too. There's a pro and a con to everything. What's the good is that these people are very motivated. Sometimes they're competing for a world championship. They want to get better fast. And so they're very, very compliant, and they don't want to leave any stone unturned. So when you can be thorough about how you assess the patient and how you interact, you have the greatest probability of success. So we have profound success and fast success with the pros. And we try to spill that philosophy over to everybody else. And, we let them know the more thorough we are, the faster you can get better.
It must be exciting to work with those kind of clients, because I will assume they are 100% compliant. They do everything you ask them to do, right?
That's a good rule for them. Yeah, they are as motivated as anybody. And so I would love to somehow encourage people to realize that, their health is the greatest thing that they can take care of. Their best gift to the world is a healthy, vibrant, happy person. And so why don't we dot every I and cross every T and move everybody we can in that direction?
You're right. And I think one of the main barriers to help those clients or people in general is it's a mind game, right? Changing our lifestyles, our routines. We are creature of habit, and oftentimes they have issues or difficulties, right, to really get there. So it's really the mind. And today I want to talk about the brain.
Well, brain is one of my favorite topics. I taught an international series in 2009 on the brain, and, I've always kept up with it. But, they say that our brain is more powerful than every supercomputer combined. And I'm talking about the brain in your head, the brain in my head, the brain in everybody's head out there. It is that complex. There's more connections in our brain than our leaves in the Amazon forest, more connections than stars in the universe. And so, most people would agree we use just a tiny percent of the potential of our brain for all areas of life, whether what we create or how happy we can really experience, or the amount of time we experience happiness. All of that can expand.
That's so fascinating when it comes to the brain. It seems that more we research the brain, less we know about it. You know what I mean?
Well, that's the humble stance, but not everybody feels that way, Dr. Serge. One of my mentors says, if we took all the Nobel Prize winners that have ever been together on the planet, and we took all that brain power and we put it together, do you think they could take raw materials and make a single living cell? And the answer is no, they can't. They haven't found that secret. So literally, even a single cell organism is more complex than all the minds could comprehend how to recreate. So somewhere along the line, you have to say there's a universal intelligence. Maybe we could even use the word God behind this.
Yeah, I agree what you're saying here. And yesterday, funny enough, one of my patients sent me a video, and it was those blind people. They couldn't see why they were blind, but through the third eye, through the pineal gland, they could see, and they could ride cars, they can play video games, they can watch TV. They knew exactly what was going on around them. So the brain is so powerful and magnificent.
So I want to take a tangent on that too. And for your viewers, since we're talking about the brain, there's a documentary called The Brain That Changes Itself.
Oh,
And there was a famous neuroscientist named Paul Baccarita who was pioneering something called sensory substitution. And there was a blind man who was seeing through an electrical apparatus. And they originally said it was like someone would draw pictures on your back and you would try to feel what it was. Then they figured out that the tongue was much more sensitive. So he'd have a little electrode on the tongue and it would draw the pictures on his tongue and his brain could actually see it. And they had a video of him shooting a basket and making it. So very, very fascinating.
wow, that's unbelievable. Like you said, God created our body, our brain. It's amazing. Let's dive into this topic because I'm sure you have seen it yourself in your clinic. I've seen it in my clinic since 2020, beginning of 2020. The pandemic really changed a lot in our life, and people are burned out, people are stressed out, people are anxious. So can you tell us a bit about what we need to do to help those people to calm the body, right? The stress, which will help the brains, because brain fog seems to be a pattern that I've seen with stress. You know what I mean? Insomnia. I mean, there's so many symptoms we can go down the road and talk about.
Well, I'm going to take a little tangent as I answer this because, I always tell people if you're going to detox, you want to separate yourself from the toxic source.
Yeah.
And negativity and fear mongering is one of the absolute worst things for the brain. You get a brain that's afraid and it gets in fight or flight mode. And blood is literally altered in the brain. You shut off the higher level thinking processes, you shut off the joy centers, and you actually function on reflex activity. And that's no way to thrive. I tell people the brain is the most nutrient dependent, energy dependent, stress vulnerable, and toxin vulnerable. And in a free circumstance, you don't get the nutrition, you get more toxins, you certainly have more stress, and you don't make good brain energy in the happy centers or in the thinking centers. So if people could find a way to get away from the negativity, my mentors told me 25 years ago, you will likely never, ever, ever need to watch the news. Anything that happens in the world, you'll find it. So, we had Hurricane Harvey here in Houston 4 years ago.
Yeah.
Well, I never watched the news, but I was driving and I saw, okay, there's lines at the gas station. People are buying a lot of water at the store. What's going on? Oh, there's a hurricane coming. Okay, when's it going to hit? Well, they're saying in 3 days. Okay, I'm going to stock up in water. I'm going to fill up in gas. By the way, then I didn't turn on the news. I turned on the weather radar to see where it was tracking.
Yeah.
And if you stay away from that negativity, you're going to do yourself a big favor. If you bathe your mind in that negativity, you're going to have a very negative mind and a negative experience.
You're right. And it seems that everywhere we turn, it's so negative. I mean, now today, there's so much misinformation and confusion. You have these different variants, different viruses. I mean, people are fed up. People are confused. They don't know what to do. So what are a few things they can do besides cutting out the negativity, the news, the social media? Anything you recommend? Any specific techniques or anything?
Well, I like don't worry, be happy. But, one, the truth shall set you free. So when we start looking at how viruses mutate, here's what we know. If a virus becomes more virulent, so virulent that it kills its host, it jeopardizes its own future. So in the entire history of viruses don't become more aggressive, they become less aggressive. And so that is the history of viruses. So if a story other than that is unfolding, suddenly we have something defying the laws of nature and jeopardizing its own viability. So we have to think twice about that. But what could be happening is people are so wrapped up in fear, fear is going to beat down their immune system. So again, I'm going to say the same thing. One, make sure you get a good night's sleep. Two, make sure that you are very conscious about what you put into your body, mind, and spirit. I tell people the Magnificent Seven, you've got to eat right, drink right, think right, move right, sleep right, poop right, talk right, and spend time with people and circumstances that are uplifting. I had the great fortune, my very last patient before I finished and came on to the interview, a very, very positive, optimistic individual, and I just said to him, I said, I really appreciate you. When you come in, we have this beautiful synergy of upliftment. And too often I've got people coming in and I'm going to take on the task to say, we're not going to talk about negative here. Let's talk about how we can empower you to wellness. And it seems like I have to do a lot more redirecting in that direction over the last year.
It's so easy to be caught up in negativity. Like you said, it's all about us. We need to really make some effort to do that, to stay away from that. And you mentioned sleep. What do you recommend to have a good night of sleep? Because I think you're right. Sleep is, to me, the foundation of health. If you don't sleep, it impacts everything else. So what are the few tricks that you would do or recommend to have a good, restful night of sleep?
Well, it kind of goes right along with what we were saying about, not having any negativity or anything that's going to release stress hormones in your body. One of my mentors talked about an electronic sunset. So about 1 hour before bed, shut off all electronics. So you notice I'm wearing glasses. You might notice they have a yellowish tinge to them. These are blue blockers.
Yeah.
And I have 3 different sets of blue blockers that are progressively, it goes from yellow to orange to red, blocking out different levels of the spectrum. And I'm going to wear the red ones, that final hour. Now, you can also change out all the lighting in your home and things like that and do things. Have a wind down routine. A warm bath can be helpful. What we know is that people sleep best in a dark, cool room, and they do best on a schedule. And so you want to have a very consistent wind down routine, a very consistent time in bed, and a time that you wake up in the morning. Bodies love that. And by the way, there's an author. He was considered the world authority on peak performance. His name is Anders Ericsson, and his book was called Peak. And what they found is that the best of the best, it didn't matter if it was in music, academics, sport, business, the best of the best would sleep 8.6 hours a night. So a lot of these people are going to agree with you that sleep's the number one. Sleep is my number one. But, sleep can be kind of like a shoe size. There's an ideal range, but there's people on either side. Yeah. And, I do know people that seem to do pretty well on much less than that. And I do know people that need more than that. But a good rule of thumb for all of us is at least 7 quality hours a night and try to get towards that 8.6.
One of the quick remedy that people use to get a good night of sleep is melatonin, right? It's one of the supplements the most sold, actually. So there's a lot of confusion about melatonin. When you came, I believe the first time on the show, you mentioned something really interesting about the connection between the gut and melatonin and the brain. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because that was really fascinating.
Yep. So the World Journal Gastroenterology published that the gut makes 400 times the melatonin as the pineal gland in the brain. And so what's fascinating about that is melatonin should not, under normal circumstances, cross the blood-brain barrier. So when people take it orally, does it get to their brain? And in theory, it shouldn't. But what it does is it puts the brakes on the stress response. And so it appears that when people are having a challenge falling asleep, it's because their body's running on stress hormones rather than not. So the adrenal cortex, the anti-stress glands that release cortisol, they have melatonin receptors. And when you take that melatonin, it likely binds there, decreases the stress response. There's a number of different ways that I assess stress resiliency, stress response in the office. And so years ago, I came up with a triple, what I call stress reset. I recommend melatonin, about 1 to 2 milligrams every waking hour. That calms the body. Theanine, 100 to 200 milligrams every waking hour. That's a GABA facilitator, crosses the blood-brain barrier, calms the mind. And then Ganoderma spores. And if you look at the medical literature, Ganoderma spores calm the body, the mind, and the spirit. And you might say, come on, the spirit? Well, yeah, there's a PubMed study that shows that. So how fascinating that, we have such wonderful tools available to us. And, now as we take the tangent of this, I think we've done more stress resets the last 18 months and it might be 5x than in any 18-month period before. So it's very, very, very significant.
So are you saying that melatonin doesn't do what people believe it does in the body? It doesn't work in the brain, but it works on the adrenals?
Well, it works in both. But so what I tell people is, we've got a blood-brain barrier. And when I was in school 30 plus years ago, they said, well, that protects the brain from toxins. Yeah. But that's not really true because most environmental toxins are fat soluble and they will readily cross the blood-brain barrier. Yeah. But what the blood-brain barrier does is it keeps what's in the brain and what's in the body. So the gut makes 90% of our serotonin, which is our happy chemical. And, you know, imagine if that crossed the blood-brain barrier. Well, everybody would be super happy all the time, but we don't see that happening. In the brain, the neurotransmitter glutamate is the neurotransmitter of seizure if it's too high. But in the body, glutamate is a neurotransmitter of pain. So I tell people, and this is what I taught when I taught my brain series, you know, imagine if we didn't have the blood-brain barrier, you walk across the room, you stub your toe, you release so much glutamate, you'd have a seizure if you didn't have the blood-brain barrier. You know, and we know that doesn't happen. So the blood-brain barrier is very, very good at keeping what's in the brain, and what's in the body, and it's going to keep melatonin in the body, or that 400x melatonin in your body would have you sleeping all the time.
So do you recommend melatonin for sleep or mostly for your stress reset protocol?
The answer is yes.
Yeah.
I recommend both.
Okay.
So, you know, we know that melatonin works for sleep, but I think we're a little more clear on the mechanism now. So what it's doing, unless you have a leaky brain, and by the way, there's people that have a leaky brain and we want to fix that, but, you know, they take it, they fall asleep, you know, it's either they have a leaky brain or their body is running on super high stress.
Wow, you've been talking about stress, or you've been mentioning stress often. So what's the connection with the brain? Stress comes from the adrenals, right? The adrenals controls or regulates your cortisol level, which impact your brain function. Would that explain the depression, the anxiety, all those different things that people are dealing with?
Yeah, but you know what? I'm going to go a little different. I'm going to say it's the brain that triggers the stress rather than the body. So
Yeah.
when you look at it, right, we have our perception. And I'll tell about a very interesting book I read, I think it was a decade ago. It was called The Good Psychopath's Guide to Success.
Okay.
And what they were doing is they were saying they would show people videos and they'd do brain mapping. They'd see, okay, what lights up in their brain? And they literally did the real life James Bond, the British Secret Service's most decorated agent. And when they would show him violent and life-threatening circumstances, this gentleman's pleasure center would light up and his ability to think actually improved. Where you show it to the average person, they become so frightened they'd want to shrink into a ball. Their stress chemicals would be high. They couldn't think at all. They had no joy. And so in that way, I'm very, very grateful that we have people that can function in that environment and function very, very effectively. By the way, they call that a good psychopath. A bad psychopath, you know, would use that type of information for very bad information. But how we perceive the circumstance makes a big difference. So one of the classic stories is, you know, let's say that a tiger walks into my room or your room. You know, most of us are going to be very, very frightened, especially if it growls. But, you know, what if it just happened to be someone's pet tiger and it was beyond tame and was just a big, wonderful animal to play with? Well, the person that knew that is very happy to see the tiger, whereas you and I are frightened out of our mind. We shut off our blood flow to our brain. We're in a fight or flight mode, or we might just be so bad that we're paralyzed by fear. Now, that's the extreme. Fight or flight can go so far that you can become paralyzed by fear, and that's usually not a good circumstance.
So what would be the top 4 or 5 products or supplements you will use to get out of the fight or flight? That's something that people ask me often. I'm sure you get that question often. So people want something to take. They are used to take pills, right? So they want herbs. They want a magic pill, right? So what would you use?
Well, I'm going to go with melatonin.
Yes.
I'm going to go with theanine. I'm going to go with Ganoderma spores. And then the next several, there's a whole series of adaptogens. There could be ginseng, there could be ashwagandha, there could be rhodiola, there could be cordyceps, you know, but the first 3 I'm very clear on. The next one, well, now we just have to look a little more specifically about how the individual's body's being affected by stress. You know, if they feel burned out, we give them ginseng. If they feel hyped up, we give them ashwagandha. If they have immune compromise, respiratory compromise, we give them cordyceps. So a lot of different ways just based on what's going on with the person. But the first 3, pretty universal.
Awesome. Thank you. And you mentioned reishi mushroom a few times. So
Yep.
let's talk a bit about that, because this is really powerful stuff. I believe there's 3 parts to the reishi mushroom, right? So can you talk a little bit about the mushroom, what it is, and the different functions? Because I believe one of it helps with brain health, I believe.
Yeah, so what's fascinating is classical herbalists will tell you that different parts of the plants have different benefit, and it certainly does. So reishi mushroom is also known as Ganoderma lucidum, is also known as ling chi. So I think more people in this part of the world know it as reishi. But
Yeah.
the root system is the mycelium. And we could encourage people to watch a documentary called Fantastic Fungi. And they talk about the root systems of the mushrooms literally being the internet of the earth. Very, very fascinating that there's communication across land that is transmitted through the roots of mushrooms. And it covers every inch of the globe. Then we have the flowering body. That's called the Ganoderma lucidum. It might be called the reishi mushroom. It's got all the fabulous 50, all the vitamins, minerals, amino acids, proteins, carbohydrates, fat, fiber, and water in doses that make a difference to human health, but also has 430 unique molecules, 79 of which are antimicrobial. And there's even PubMed studies that show that it helps to block replication of HIV virus. There's a popular virus that we don't name these days because somehow that information gets blocked, but you could do a PubMed search, Ganoderma lucidum, and maybe a virus you're interested in, you might be very surprised to find there's really good medical studies that Ganoderma is good for that. And then we have the spores, and that's what I mentioned because when you look at the spores, that's how the plant replicates. Some of the bioactive components, some of the very unique properties and molecules within that plant are 75 times more concentrated in the spores. So if someone wanted the best of everything, they would blend the mycelium, the Ganoderma lucidum, and the spores. But if I go with one, I go with the spores because they're clearly most powerful.
That may be why I haven't been sick in some times, because I've been drinking my King every morning, twice a day. I get the spore through the coffee. So let's talk a little bit about the coffee, right? You've been working, or you've been associated with Organo, which is a company that makes beverages. And one of them is coffee, right?
Yep.
I believe one of the reasons is coffee is one of the most drank beverage in the world, right? The second, I believe, after water.
Yeah, and by the way, tea's not far behind. So they have teas as well. But let's go back to my world champion athletes. So, I've treated so many of them. And when they were in their season, when they were going for a championship, when they were going for a gold medal, they were as diligent about every part of their life and program as anybody could be. But as soon as their career was over, guess what? They stopped. They basically stopped. And you can look at pictures of Michael Jordan after his playing days, and he doesn't look like anything, clearly he's not doing the same thing he was doing when he was playing.
Good point.
So what we know is that when people drink coffee or tea, it's a daily habit, and it's usually a multiple time daily habit. So we look here in the US, the average person drinks 3.3 cups a day of coffee. If you go to Finland, they drink 9 cups a day. So
wow.
when you take something that, coffee itself does have some health benefits. It's got some antioxidants. It's got some anti-diabetic effect. It's actually got some fat burning benefit. It even has some brain benefit. But there's some downside to coffee. Some of it can be the toxicity, the pesticides, the acidities. So what the company has done is they patented a process by which they process the acid out of the coffee. So suddenly the coffee becomes alkaline. Then they mix in the most alkaline food in the world. And what they do by alkalizing the coffee and then mixing it in is they maximize the body benefit of the enzymes within Ganoderma. So it's absolutely brilliant. So they make a better coffee, and then they put that coffee, they turbocharge it in a way that just enhances the body, the mind, and the medical literature will even say the spirit.
Wow, this is fascinating, because one of the questions I get a lot, people believe they need to quit drinking the coffee in order to be healthy. And if you look on PubMed or on different search engines, you can look at information that connect, dementia, Alzheimer's disease, different cancer, blood pressure, heart issues with coffee drinking. So are you saying that it's okay to drink coffee? It's healthy for you?
Well, there's a 5.3 million people year follow-up study in New England Journal of Medicine. Here's what they said. People who drink the most coffee live the longest. It is America's #1 source of antioxidants. And it's said that we, wear out, we rust out before we burn out as a general rule. And so there's some benefits there. But now, again, we're going to take coffee and we're going to make it better. So, Lucretius said over 2,000 years ago, one man's food's another man's poison. There's people that don't tolerate coffee and they shouldn't drink it.
Yeah.
But about 9 out of 10 people that don't tolerate regular coffee not only tolerate our coffee, but thrive on it. because it's alkaline, because it's enriched.
I was one of them, actually. I couldn't tolerate coffee well. I mean, I would drink it, but I will feel it. I will feel the adrenaline. I will feel the stress, the jitter, right? So people ask me often, I'm sure you do have that question as well, adrenal coffee, it's bad. When you drink coffee, it's bad for your stress hormones, bad for your adrenals. You shouldn't do that.
One man's food's another man's poison, but here's one thing we know: bodies ignore constant stimuli. So, I'm in my home and there's an air conditioner hum, but unless I pay attention to it, I don't hear it. Your body will ultimately, begin to ignore things that are constant.
Yeah.
And so what they've shown the studies, if someone rarely drinks coffee, then they will get an adrenaline spike. But after about 5 days, it's more than 90% reduced because the body's adapted to it. So consistency can win there. But keep in mind, it is true, some people just won't tolerate it at any dose or any frequency. So we just want to honor our bodies wherever our bodies are.
You're right. You have to listen and pay attention to what your body is telling you when it comes to drinking or food, eating.
Yep.
There was a question that was asked last time. I'm not sure we covered that. So that person wanted to know about mold and acrylamide, those two toxins, right, that are found in coffee beans.
Well, so you want to certainly go with good quality. So, that's why our coffee is what they call GMP certified, good manufacturing processes. So they're screened for mold, toxins, fungus, you name it. So number of certifications: EcoCert, kosher, halal, USDA certified organic. You're profoundly diligent. And I think that's really what your patients love about you. And it's the same with me. If I wouldn't put it in my own body, if I wouldn't give it to my family, I'm not going to give it to my patients. Once they get that, once they see that, but the real test is, let's put it in your body and see. Let's take some measurements. If you typically have, racing heart, let's assess your heart rate. If you have a blood sugar problem or some type of crash, let's assess that as well.
Thank you. Yes, you're right. Everybody is a bit different. So food is really important for brain. Some doctors have coined the term type 3 diabetes for dementia or Alzheimer, right?
Yep.
So what is the top foods for brain health?
Well, the brain is mostly water. So in fact, it's the most hydrated tissue in the body. It's 77% water. So we could certainly go with a category of high water content foods. But, nutrients draw water into cells, toxins draw water from the cells. So we have to be fully nourished and not very toxic. Besides water, the top component of brain is fat. And it's a very specific fat, an omega-3 fat called docosahexaenoic acid, DHA. And so that would make fish oils or salmon the top food for the brain.
Wow. What about the other fats? Coconut oil, right? It's a big thing on that. People believe it's good. Some other people believe it's not so good. I get the saturated fat confusion there. So fats in general are healthy for you.
Good fats are good, bad fats are bad, and you want to always have balance. That's the key. So if you did all coconut oil and no other good fat, you'd create an imbalance in your system. By the way, if you did too much fish oil and not enough other, you'd create a different type of imbalance in your system. That's a little harder to do, but it certainly can happen. So, we have 50 essential nutrients and we need all 50. Without them, we die. And so you can't think you're ever going to do one thing and solve every problem in humanity.
Good point. And what is the food? What's the worst food for the brain? You mentioned bad fats, right? Carbs?
Well, so carbs certainly can be. So when you start looking at Alzheimer's, some people call it a type 3 diabetes of the brain. And so there's a protein that's made in the brain that actually chokes off neurons if it gets too high. It's called amyloid. And when you have high levels of insulin in the body spiked by carbs, and by the way, aggravated by stress, you don't break down amyloid and you can choke off the neurons. There's also something called neurofibrillary tangles. Those are associated with Alzheimer's disease. But, there's a 2016 Nobel Prize awarded for a process called autophagy, and it's how the body recycles bad proteins. And interestingly enough, intermittent fasting enhances autophagy. Exercise enhances it. Coffee enhances it. and a ketogenic diet enhances it. So those are 4 good guidelines.
Oh, wow. Thank you. So this is where people need to start if they're concerned about their brain health.
Yeah, and so everything counts. I'll tell people you've got to eat right, drink right, think right, move right, sleep right, poop right, talk right every day. If they were to sit down with you and take an inventory of how well they're doing in each category, you're only as strong as your weakest link. So, if people are stressed out of their mind, we've got to get them away from their stress. If they're intoxicated themselves, we have to stop that. If they're not nourishing their body, mind, and spirit, we need to fix that. If they don't move at all, we need to get moving, and on and on.
So what do you do for toxins? Because it seems that it's really challenging to avoid exposure to those thousands of toxins in our lives. And what do you do about the brains? Because you said that toxins are fat soluble and gets to the brain. Can we detox the brain?
We can. And so ultimately, and by the way, I can go back to Ganoderma. So I'll tell an interesting story. There was a group of drug addicts in Southern California in the early 1980s. And you can look it up. It's called The Case of the Frozen Addicts. They called them frozen because they injected this synthetic heroin, MPTP, and they all woke up the next day with Parkinson's disease. And it was permanent. And so the doctors looked at them and they said, okay, that really is bad for you, but maybe we can make some good out of this. Maybe we can now study this drug and maybe someday find a cure for Parkinson's. Well, in 2018, someone decided to study Ganoderma lucidum and MPTP. And the title of the PubMed article is this: Ganoderma lucidum ameliorates or makes better MPTP-induced Parkinson's. So Ganoderma can pull toxins out of the brain. The body has other mechanisms. I tell people that detox is very nutrient dependent, very energy dependent, even protein dependent. And so you want to have a balanced diet. But there's categories of foods that are available called functional foods and medical foods, over 80,000 PubMed studies on these, and some are proven to enhance detoxification. If you can improve the liver, if you can improve the kidney, if you can improve the bowel, if you can improve the lymphatic, you can improve detoxification, and all those can be improved. And then, of course, you want to minimize the toxins you're exposed to.
And I would like to add something on this because that was well said, but a lot of people go crazy and they get those different protocols and products online or whatever. So if you want to detox, work with somebody like Dr. Bob who knows what they are doing when it comes to detox. Because I've seen people getting fairly sick doing them by themselves.
I have too. And in fact, we even had a patient that ended up in the ICU, the critical care with a very tough case. Wow. And what they ended up doing, they bought products that were just blatantly fraudulent. Yeah. And so, if you're going to purchase online, purchase directly from a reputable company. Yeah. And that's always a good rule. When you've got a company that does the due diligence, has the quality certifications, and a lot of these companies, by the way, will only sell to doctors because they're treating health circumstances or sometimes life-threatening circumstances. So, my compliments to you for being a great colleague and leading people in such a beautiful, healthy direction. And we take pride in doing that as well.
Thank you. So I would like to end this conversation on a really positive note. Anxiety is really high lately, right? It has been high. Can you talk a bit about this and maybe a testimony of one of your clients came in, she was having a hard time and you really got her back on track?
Well, and it's very similar of what we talked. And by the way, I don't even have to go any further than yesterday than to do that, So people, they may have the highest stress level, the highest anxiety level that we've ever seen. And sometimes, in the conversation with this friend was basically let go and let God. Everything has a purpose. And when we reframe things, and ultimately it has to be within their value system where they can get it. I just simply asked her, do you think more people are waking up to what's really happening in the world? And as that happens, do you think that ultimately that will lead to a better outcome? And she said, well, that's certainly my hope. And I said, here's what I can tell you. I see more and more people waking up every single day. And since this person had faith, I said, let go and let God, and that will be fine. But there's simple things that we can do. And one thing is, keep a gratitude journal. It doesn't cost anything. And there's thousands of studies on the health benefits of gratitude. Then you want the biochemical help. We mentioned the theanine, the Ganoderma, and the melatonin every waking hour. How long do you do it? I do it 7 to 10 days for people because they're really in a stress loop. And I think across the board, people have all noticed an amazing thing. So let's just say count your blessings often, look for the positive, nourish your body, mind, and spirit in ways that are proven to help you move forward.
Well, thank you. Really powerful, really simple, right things to do, but so powerful. And you're right. If you let your situation to God, God will do it for you.
Always.
Always. Dr. Bob, it was a pleasure again to talk with you. Let's do this again. We can talk and talk about different things. So let's meet again next month.
I'm looking forward to it. I'm already looking forward. It's one of my highlights of my month. So I appreciate you.
Thank you. Have a blessed day to you, and we'll talk to you next month.
I look forward to it.